please give a warm welcome to Gregory C.
Hi guys, my name is Greg. I'm an alcoholic. I have been sober since May 10th, 2016, so 30 more days and I'll hit 5 years. Anytime I give my sobriety date, I get this lump in my throat, and I will apologize right now, I'm a crier. I don't like to admit it, but I'm a crier. But anytime I give my sobriety date, I get a lump in my throat, and I think the day that I don't have that lump in my throat is the day that I need to be worried. What can I say? I grew up here in Dallas. As a guy on an app the other day told me, he was like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from Dallas." He's like, "Oh, you're one of those rare Dallas unicorns." I almost texted him my address, almost told him the door was unlocked because I was in love, but didn't. I'm told by my sponsor family that we dress up for these occasions, and we also don't cuss. I did the dress up part. Can't promise I don't cuss. I like to drop the F-bomb. It's my favorite word. It's also one of my favorite pastimes. So we'll just see how that goes. Like I said, I grew up here in Dallas. I'm the last of 2 kids. My brother, who is about 4 years older than me, who is also an alcoholic. My mom, who is a Southern Baptist. And my dad, who is also an alcoholic. And his dad was an alcoholic, so it's in the family. My brother was one of those rare people that just, after 2.5 DWIs, just quit drinking. My dad, unfortunately, is still out there, and we're starting to see a little bit of signs of probably dementia and some long-lasting effects on that. Like I said, I'm the last of 2 kids. On my mom's side of the family, she's the last of 9, so I'm the last of almost like 16 grandkids. Her dad was a Southern Baptist pastor, and I was the last hope to carry on that legacy, and there was a brief part of me that tried to do that. But, well, God had other plans, we'll say. What else? We grew up in a great home. We wanted for nothing. We like to think, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, we like to think we were the Ewings, but in turn, we were actually the Connors from Roseanne. There were times where because my parents wanted to provide for us for anything, I remember one summer we had to take our mattresses out to the patio because our electricity got turned off. And it was cooler outside than inside at that time. Growing up, my brother and I were latchkey kids. We knew that my father drank a lot because at times there were shouting, a lot of verbal abuse because of the alcohol to my mother. And that lady's a saint, man. She has stood by 3 alcoholics. Damn it, not this early. Early age, I knew there was something different about me. I didn't fit in with the regular kids. I didn't fit in with my brother. I didn't fit in with my cousins. And early on, there was molestation, and even incest is part of my story. But I worked past it. Growing up, you heard of the mall rats. I was a church rat. My mom thought that was the safest harbor for me. So after school, I was thrown into church activities. Anytime the church doors were open, we were there. If they weren't open, we were there. And so that was part of in my opinion, their master plan to get me to be a minister. I tried going to college at Ouachita Baptist University in the thriving metropolis of Arkadelphia, Arkansas. I lasted 1 year, and as my friend Brandon likes to point out about his time at Texas Sam Houston, they asked me not to come back or take some time off. And I began working at a local megachurch and really coming to terms with who I was. And I discovered those things called the tricky trees. Right out there in Irving off of Tom Braniff. And that's the way I came out to my parents, because one Good Friday was not such a Good Friday in my book. I went to grab something, and instead of grabbing what I thought was a hard something else, it was a cop badge. And so we went through all Easter weekend. My mom, who can read me like a book, was like, "What's the matter?" And finally, the Monday after Easter, I said, "We need a lawyer," because it was a misdemeanor, and I had to go to trial. And you think one time was enough? Nope, it happened again. And I let my license expire. So this was about 3 or 4 years later. I let my license expire, and my mom got tired of hauling a 20-something-year-old kid around. And so we went to the DMV. I went to get my license renewed. And when I turned around, there was a cop because I had a warrant out for my arrest. And lo and behold, I told mom, still gay. But with that being said, I really didn't start my drinking because of that, and because of working for the church, and because I was taught being gay was wrong. I began to hide a lot of things. And after 2 rehabs, that's what I noticed, what they diagnosed me as, or for my alcoholism, was because of all the secrets that I hid. I really didn't start drinking until I was 21. And because I was working for this mega church, I went to Tyler and got drunk on my 21st birthday because within my employment contract, I couldn't drink inside radius of Dallas. But once I took that first drink, it was off to the races. As time went on, I got fired from the church because of being gay. Because I never finished college, I took a job with a major airline here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex that likes to drink every Friday, and I was off to the races, man. It became a problem very quickly. And I noticed that it was more, I couldn't pay my rent. I like many of us do, I chose to buy alcohol over rent, buy alcohol over car payments. I think I've had like 3 cars repoed because I just chose that. All through those years of hiding who I was, I actually found out that I was HIV positive back in 2005, and that just compounded the secrets because my parents, who were Southern Baptists, who were raising a kid in the 70s, late 70s, 80s, and 90s, only knew the bad part of being gay. They didn't understand HIV. They didn't understand that, it's one pill now. I was thinking about it the other day, and that's all they knew. They knew what they saw in the news of what was happening to so many gay men and women around the world just because of the epidemic. So I just was ashamed and kept drinking, went through job after job. And by the time I ended my drinking career, I was living in what we call the mailbox. It was an apartment over on Cole Avenue, which has now been torn down. I was paying $600 to $700 a month, and I couldn't pay that. I went to one rehab. This sobriety date is not my first sobriety date. It was sometime in October 2014. I had discovered other forms of alcohol, you could say. And during a 5-day binge, on Wednesday, I quit my job as an apartment leaser and continued the party. Occasionally, I would go home and check on my dog, feed and walk her, but go right back to this guy's house. And by the end of that Friday, I was just like, I'm exhausted. I've been up for 5 days, quit my job. It all just kind of hit me. And so I made the call to my parents and was like, hey, I think I have a drug problem. And they're like, what? I think when I said a drug problem, they thought maybe a little marijuana, maybe a little cocaine, but not the good stuff that a lot of us know. And so I went to rehab just west of here called The Right Step. It was the wrong step for me. At the time, I stayed sober maybe 2 or 3 days once I got out. And I lied to many of y'all in this room that I was sober because I took my 30-day chip high. I took my 30-day chip drunk. And for 2 years, I lived in nothing but continued lies. That's the big thing in my life, was all those lies that I told. And, I find it really ironic now because when I would call my mom every day like a good son, she would be like, you sound so stopped up. I'm like, it's just my allergies. Lo and behold, in our book, it talks about the allergy, but I think God has a sense of humor. So that continued on for 2 years. And once again, I couldn't pay this rent. I was having my now passed away grandmother pay rent for me. I was having my dad pay rent for me. I had my grandmother's credit card number. I was having alcohol delivered on her credit card number. I had it all planned out. I lived like right at Cole and Knox. As soon as they built that Trader Joe's there on Cole, I would go to that Trader Joe's on Cole, buy about 6 bottles of wine. That was a good night. Drink about 6 bottles of wine in one night. The next day, I would go to the 7-Eleven on Fitzhugh, buy Pub Pegasus for those real local Dallasites. And then the next day, I would go to the Seagulls right there at Fitzhugh and Cole. I had it all planned out, my little map, so nobody would notice I had a problem. Whatever. So I was just kidding myself. And once again, I found that eviction notice on the door. And I called my parents. And I said, I'm still drinking and doing a little extra party favors every now and then. And they were like, we know, but this time we're not going to find the rehab for you. Because the first time God love them, the first time they had no clue what to do with me, so they sent me to Green Oaks, which lasted one night. And then what I didn't know, all night long they were searching for another rehab here in Dallas. But this time around they said, it's up to you to find the place that you need to go. And something deep inside of me just said, I can't stay here in Dallas. I often depended on them I always depended on them for everything. And when I was at that first rehab, they were bringing me clothes, they were bringing me treats, and just all this kind of stuff and dropping off. I was like, at this time I was 37, I was like, I need to grow the F up and learn how to be independent. So we started looking for rehabs outside of Dallas. And my brother's employer is also one of us and was getting ready to go away. And the sober coach, or I don't know what he is, found me one out in San Clemente, San Juan Capistrano, called New Method Wellness. I've traveled many times in my life away from my parents, but there was something like when the fog lifted, when I was sitting in that intake room, I was like, what the heck did I just do? I'm 1,600 miles away from my family, God knows how long. But something in me that time told me I was ready. It wasn't because I had a bad rehab the first time. Something in me just told me I was ready. And there I started working the steps. There I learned I could be independent from my family. There I also blamed my family for my alcoholism. And it wasn't until I started working with my current sponsor that I figured out, it's not their fault, it's mine. But I stayed out there about 90 days. And it was, the first time I told my story, I was telling about the rehab, and I was told not to use this again because I was talking about my first spiritual experience on how I had it in the middle of the ocean on a surfboard. It was a nice rehab. What made my mom feel best about me going halfway across the country is the same day that I booked my plane ticket, told him I would be there. We were watching Dr. Phil, and he was sending a chick to the same rehab. And so she figured as long as it's good enough for Dr. Phil, it's good enough for me. But that place really did change my life. I learned to be independent. I learned that I grew up a little bit, and it was an amazing time, not just because I was in sunny California, but just because of the lessons I learned and the surrender that I got to experience out there. I came home and my life changed dramatically. At that time, as soon as I got home from Dallas, Brooke, I went to a Lambda meeting, and Brooke he knew I worked for a retail company that graciously gave me some time off to go get my life together. And he knew I worked in retail. He's like, hey, I've got the perfect sponsor for you. And my first sponsor worked at Crate & Barrel. I worked at the competitor, Sur La Table, but that first sponsor was CMC. And that group of guys that he surrounded himself with scooped me up. and I owe them so much. Ethan is here. He was one of those guys that kind of scooped me up. We went to a conference out in LA together, roomed together, had a great time. And it was just amazing. You know, I worked the steps like my life depended on it, like we were told to do. And life has just, each day has gotten fuller. You know, I started working with a new sponsor not too long, about 2 years ago now. And it was when he lives in Austin, so every Sunday morning about 9 o'clock we FaceTime. Occasional trips down there. We get to get together. And what really changed was when we first started working together, we met in Waco. We did a house cleaning, and I did another 4th step. And, you know, my parents once again showed up. And in between that 2.5 years, it was still a rocky relationship with my parents. You know, I still blame them for a lot of things. And through this inventory that I did, and through a very honest sponsor, we found out that the problem was me. And I took that hour drive back to Dallas as that hour that I kind of prayed and meditated. And I just had that big moment in my life that I was like, wow, you know, all those issues that I thought were my parents' fault, for me being gay, for me being an alcoholic, for me doing this and doing that, really ended up, it was those fancied realities that we talk about in the book sometimes. And once I got home and started really working on that relationship, our relationship changed. They began to depend on me. I'm going to pull a little Patrick Webster secret. If you get teared up, take a drink of water. And, you know, they began calling me to ask me to do stuff. I have an older brother. They didn't call him. They called me. And that has been an amazing thing. This past October, I lost someone very important in my life. And it was my grandmother, the lady who paid my rent, the lady that bailed me out time and time again. Right about the time I got she got sick. She didn't die or pass away from COVID. She was 99. And up until then, she was super healthy. I got laid off. And I don't think anything is by happenstance. I got laid off from an airline, and I got to spend the last days with her. And even more amazing is my parents. My dad, who it was his mother, depended on me to make some tough decisions. You know, whether it's to bring her home from hospice, you know, just all that. And you know, that grows you up fast. I feel like during that time, I became a whole new man. You know, I depended on my tribe, which they're all here tonight. I depended on them to help me wipe away the tears, so I could show up and be there for my family. But, you know, that was one of the toughest things I had to do in my sobriety. And I stayed sober. And there was one little blow up with my family, and that was it. And that, if you know my family, that's a big thing. But just getting to show up for them, for a lady that showed up for me many, many times when I didn't deserve it. I like to talk about step 2 and 3 a lot when I tell my story, because I grew up very Christian. And it was about 2.5, 3 years into my sobriety that I really took that concept of God, that old concept of God, like it talks about on page 42, and I threw it out the window. And it is such a huge journey that I've been on, and a continuing journey that I've been on. I didn't get a car. I went 8 years without a car. So a lot of time of my sobriety, I didn't have a car. And now I'm the proud owner of Shakia. Clever name for a Kia. But I was in the Uber one day on the way home after work, and I don't know how I struck up this conversation with this Uber driver, but she was talking about being gay, being a Christian, and then I told her I was gay, I was a Christian, or I had this relationship with God, and I was also an alcoholic in recovery. And we just started talking. She's like, how do you manage that? And just, it was one of those moments in my life. I was like, how do I manage that? Because of all the bad press, I guess you could say, Christians get because of the way they treat others. And I told her, I was like, you know what? For me, growing up, I was always taught that it was a relationship. And as these words were coming out of my mouth, I don't know who was, it wasn't me, but it was making sense to me. And I said, you know, it really, that moment, that step 3, where that God of my understanding came to being. And it was simply, I have a different relationship with everybody in this room, and nobody can dictate it. So why should somebody dictate that relationship with God, my higher power? And it was a huge moment in my life, you know, because a lot of my friends ask me how I can still go to church sometimes on Sundays, how I can still listen to Christian music and be a gay man living with HIV. And, you know, it just all clicked for me then. You know, it's about that relationship with our higher power. Over the years, it's become more and more broader. During non-COVID times, one of my favorite things to do is go to Friday night Shabbat services with Brandon. I've opened my idea, my concept of God to a much broader and roomier concept of God. And that has seen me through a lot of things. It's, you know, right at that 1 year mark, I got in a relationship. And with another fellow alcoholic. And, you know, right about that 2 year mark, it went to crap. And through some current work with my sponsor, we have discovered that, once again, it wasn't his fault that the relationship didn't work out. It was mine, because I was living in untreated alcoholism. We were living where I kind of live now. And I blamed it was too far to go to a meeting. I couldn't find a ride to a meeting. But, you know, we're working on some stuff now that may actually be possible amends to my ex, which is a hard pill to swallow. But, you know, it was me. It wasn't him. I was, you know, not going to meetings. I didn't have any sponsees at the time. I was rarely talking to my sponsor. I was just living the good life in our big old apartment. Life today, like I said, it's really broad. It's really great. I've gotten to make some lifelong friends. You know, I always wanted to impress people growing up. I always wanted to make sure I was the most popular kid, and I never was. Today, I feel like the most popular kid. I've got a group of guys that saw me through the death of my grandmother, that has seen me through getting fired from one job and getting laid off from a job, that have seen me through unemployment, hopeless, what I thought was hopeless days of living off pandemic checks and unemployment, that I can say, like, hey, I had a weak moment, because my form of alcohol shows up in different forms of alcohol shows up in my life on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of times that's sex. A lot of times I, you know, sneak around to sordid places to find validation. And the more I'm honest with these guys, the more I'm honest with my sponsor, the more I find that behavior objectionable. And it's amazing, you know, it's amazing to, I talked to a fellow person over the summer in our sponsorship family, and he said, what if you just sat through that discomfort one night and prayed? I've done that. It's uncomfortable. These guys know that if I call them and say, hey, let's go to dinner, let's watch Drag Race, there's probably something else boiling in the back that, you know, I want to go get in some trouble. But I think if I got busted one more time in those parks, I would have to register on a list that's not so fancy and not be, you know, there would be some restrictions on where I lived. But life is good today. I have 2 sponsees, I think. I think they're both kind of somewhere out there. I occasionally hear from them. I do the work that my sponsor says. You know, and it's been an amazing journey over the last few years because growing up, I always wondered if I fit in. And even to this day, sometimes I wonder if I fit in. Despite the 6 bottles of wine a night that barely gave me a buzz, wonder if I fit in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and some of the other fellowships. I was attending another fellowship and they were talking about these shadow people that they saw. I was like, I never experienced that. I just remember the SWAT team outside my apartment. And then I was like, oh, I deserve a seat in that fellowship too. But I guess it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I kind of shared this last time I told my story, is I had some time on my hands, as one being unemployed does. And I started thinking about the dots that connected me to Alcoholics Anonymous. When I turned 30, I went through my midlife crisis, what I like to call, and I up and quitted. Obviously, I failed English. I quit my job and went to culinary school for about a year and a half. And my bright idea was not to work in a restaurant, but to work in a hair salon. And there was this little British man that didn't do nails. He was a hairdresser there. And a few years later, when I arrived back into the rooms, he came up to me and goes, do you remember who I am? Took a minute. And that man's Harvey H. Then I remember sitting next to this guy at church. He was sweating off some party favors. I was sweating off some Pinot Grigio. And the room was cold, and we were both sitting there sweating to death. That guy today is also sober, married to one of my best friends and sponsee brothers. Through them, I met that guy that introduced me. You know, we were just, I don't know how it happened. We were just sitting in a meeting and we're like, you're cool, I'm cool, let's hang out. Let's go. Our grandparents both came from Central Texas in the Waco area. And we're like, remember that little park we used to go to? Did you ever go to the Lions Park in Waco? And we're like, yeah, let's take a trip. So we went to try to find Chip and Joanna and the Branch Davidians and just kind of had a walk down memory lane that day. And, you know, we became fast friends. There was something different about him. He had immense knowledge of the Big Book. He had this everlasting network of people that he always talked about. And he had this really cool sponsor. And so we went to Waco. Actually, that was why we went to Waco, was to listen to her speak. And she was just amazing. And then I heard her again. And then it was the last, what was the show called? The Drag Wars. It was the last Drag Wars I think we had. And it was up here in Dallas. And I told him, I was like, hey, I think I want a new sponsor. Do do you think Marty would sponsor me? And he's like, yeah, she'll sponsor, but she's busy. How about this guy? And that was Eric B. from Austin. And we began going on 2 years now working together. And without meeting and becoming friends with Brandon, I would have never met my sponsor. When I lived in the mailbox a block over were Chris and Will. And I would often hide from them because I think we had met early on in when I first came through the rooms, and I think they knew who I was. I knew who they were, but I would also often walk down this alley, walking my dog at the time, looking grand, hungover, drunk, or high, and I would hide from them. And now Chris and Will are two of my great friends that we share a lot of great times together on Friday nights and with Drag Race and all this great stuff. I tell you this story because I often wonder if I belong in these rooms. And the answer is yes. And I know that's a question a lot of people ask many times is, do I belong in this room? And the answer is yes, there's a chair for you. But the great thing is that before I even admitted or knew that I was an alcoholic, or before I even knew what Pinot Grigio and high-class box wine tasted like, God knew I was going to be in these rooms. And I was able one day just to see just a glimpse of that path that he started planning for me way before I was ready to admit that I was an alcoholic, way before I was ready to sit all the way down and listen and take the action that needs to be taken to stay sober. If we're lucky, sometimes we get to see our life come full circle. I took a job a few weeks ago as a corporate recruiter for a restaurant chain here in Dallas. And if you've seen my Facebook, you see the view that I have. It's a beautiful view of downtown from my desk. But it's also a view of where that old dilapidated apartment used to stand. It's since been torn down. And there are times where I just get lost sitting at my desk in gratitude for the journey that I've got to come on. It's been rough, but today in this meeting that I got to attend every day before I got employed again, we were talking about page 42 and just I couldn't help but think of that time, those times spent in that apartment where there was no hope and everything was just dark and everything was just so it's in high definition now, and it's a beautiful life. And I think it's on page 43 that talks about we wouldn't trade our best days as a drunk for our worst days in sobriety, and that's the truth. My grand sponsor likes to say, we don't have bad days, sugar, we just have sad days. And I've had plenty of sad days. I've been broken up with, I've lost a dog, I've lost a grandmother, and I know there will be many more sad days to come, but that's okay, as long as I stay sober. But yeah, I can't express how great life is today, even when in those small moments when I don't think life is. I'm in a job that I love, but lo and behold, the airline that I got let go from because of the pandemic wants me back. Nobody's ever wanted me back. So we're having that conversation on Monday. I may have just jinxed it, knocked on this fake wood that we'll see what happens, but nobody ever wanted me back. None of the employers that I walked out on before I got sober wanted me back. Half of my friends that I had when I was sober didn't want me back. There was probably a couple years ago, right when I started working with my current sponsor, these two over here on this bench saw the nasty part of Greg. They saw Craig come out and try to read them for filth, but those two over there are the queens of reading people for filth. And you know what? They wanted me back as their friend. And so to think that, an employer wants me back is pretty amazing. So if you're here tonight and you're questioning whether or not you belong in these chairs, in these rooms, in this fellowship or another fellowship you do, it was, I've gotten the opportunity to see the hand of God guide me through the last almost 5 years. I've gotten to have that realization that God never runs from me. All I've got to do is stop and turn around because he's always there. I've got to be honest. I've got to be honest with my tribe. I've got to be honest with my family. That's a big thing, is being honest with my family, because there's still a lot of PR in my head going on, trying to make them think that life is great. There's a lot more being honest with my sponsor, and there's no judgment ever there. There's no judgment from these guys, from my parents, from my family, or from my tribe, or from my sponsor. And that's amazing, because this guy likes to keep everything bottled up here until it explodes. Well, it looks like we may have an early dismissal tonight. Once again, my name is Greg. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks for letting me share.